So I recently stumbled upon a video made by the Curse Judge about PUBG that detailed why PUBG is not what it once was. What happened to PUBG was it strayed too far from its survival roots and in that process diminished the attention and heart rate that PUBG is known for. It started by streamers hot dropping school and ended with developers actively supporting that playstyle. But when I watched this video, I thought of Apex. But what's different about Apex Legends is that Apex moved in the exact opposite direction. It got slower, and in that process lost what it first found success from. But first, let me set the stage. It's 2019, the gaming community is going back and forth about what BR to play, and it's a push and pull between PUBG and Fortnite. In the middle of all of this, Apex or Apex Legends is silently dropped out of nowhere one day. The first ever marketed material I saw was Jack Frax's video that same day. And what pulled me into the game was the fact that you could respawn with the help of your teammates, a solution to a problem that had previously plagued BRs. But more importantly, what kept me playing was its non-stop adrenaline rush that is Apex combat. While PUBG was leaning against the milsim crowd and Fortnite the kindergarten crowd, there was a large audience left out, an audience that might have grown tired of PUBG's formula of slow gameplay, quick deaths and sparse action, and an audience, well, that aren't kids. It was this audience that Respawn and EA meant to capture, and they did, and then some. At face value, Apex is like any other battle royale. There are 20 squads of 3 players dropping into the map, the circle becomes smaller and smaller over time, and the last squad remaining wins. What made it stand out, at least at first glance, is its hero shooter influences together with the fact that it's developed by Respawn Entertainment, the creators behind Titanfall. With many different legends to choose from, each has their own set of unique abilities similar to Overwatch. But this doesn't explain what Apex really is. To be honest, if you're cynical enough, you can call all of these things gimmicks. To see why Apex in the first place was successful is to look at the market it overtook. The game design stemmed from one core principle: to make players engage and fight constantly. This statement might seem wild, but a valid tactic specifically employed in PUBG was to gamble to the last circle, and PUBG's game design would even encourage such playstyle. But Apex turned this on its head by implementing a few key changes. Drastically increased TTK, or time to kill. If you're unfamiliar with the term, it essentially means that high TTK makes enemies bullet spongy, but a high TTK gives players headroom when peeking or running across fields, because you're less likely to be punished doing so. Smaller maps, and not just necessarily as square footage, but a map can be perceived smaller with increased movement speed and ways of transport such as balloons. Introduce fast sprinting and new movement mechanics. This together with the high TTK makes targets harder to hit, which subsequently makes fights last longer. Smart inventory management with the aim to minimize the time spent looting and the time spent staring at your inventory screen. One-dimensional attachments. In Apex, attachments have no drawbacks whatsoever, and the difference between two can easily be discernible by color, which indicates power and rarity. Also, the loot system makes assumptions about you and your attachments. It will automatically equip and trade up attachments when you find an upgrade. A clever pinging system which effectively eliminates communication problems, particularly useful when teaming up with random players. An innovative squad respawn system. This has a reason for a fallen squadmate who has been killed to actually stick around for the rest of the game, but it also makes riskier plays viable because losing one squadmate will not necessarily cripple you for the rest of the game. Finally, a squad deploy system that lets the squad leader determine where to land on the map. So Apex can boast all of these features, and at the time they were all innovative, so at launch these were all additional selling points. But if you're paying attention, you can see a few common denominators. These features, for one, minimizes the time players spend looting, and second, makes traveling, peeking and gunfights less punishing. Both of these makes the game significantly faster. But as seasons went on, the game, well, got slower. Most notably in Season 3, when World's Edge was released, the map stood as a watershed moment for players. Size-wise, if you were to overlay World's Edge on top of Kings Canyon, Apex's first map, they're both pretty similar, but in gameplay, wildly different. The main culprit is POIs, or point of interest. World's Edge has a lot of them. Squads can therefore end up at many different POIs, making the early game a slog. As a result, hot dropping, meaning landing in one small area together with many other squads, went from a niche TTV playstyle to the playstyle. It was the community's way of bringing back fun to the early game. It's important to remember that some players will hot drop no matter how fast the map or game is played, but it first becomes an issue when most or all players do. If you look at this picture, do you see a problem? Some would argue hot dropping isn't a problem, but it certainly ruins the game's pacing when there are 5 squads remaining but only 5 minutes have passed. You trade a slow early game for a slow end game. From my own experience, I hot drop pretty much every single game I played on World's Edge, but hot dropping at its core is short-term excitement. It makes the first few minutes a thrill, but the remaining match a bore. Well, Respawn knows this and has mentioned this issue again and again ever since Season 3, discussing how they're trying to combat hot dropping by redesigning maps, especially Fragment, World's Edge hot drop of choice, in an attempt to spread squads out over the map. The Fragment redesign did not come until Season 17, but the question isn't really how to stop players hot dropping, the question is why players hot drop in the first place. I believe the slow early game, which is the main reason why players hot drop, can be traced back to the community. Somewhere along the way, the Apex community learned to despise third parties, where its presence remains a point of discussion on pretty much every update thread. So the developers looked at the so-called problems that are third parties. And there's a saying that goes, do not listen to what your customer wants, listen to what they need. Instead, the developers most likely took one of the community's proposed solutions but never spent time looking into the problem itself. Why are third parties a problem? Why are players against it? And is the view on third parties different depending on skill level? Now, third party as a problem is usually described as 2 teams, both on an even skill level, fighting a fair fight. Both teams are low, either in remaining health or numbers. And what is thought of unfair is when a full team comes along and finishes the 2 weak teams. If Apex Combat was as easy as a turn-based game, then the third party with the full squad would win every time, but Apex isn't deterministic. One player might land a few more shots, one player could accidentally slide out of the way and save themselves from incoming fire. And the wrench in this whole machine is player skill. I would argue both low skill players and the highest skill players dislike third parties. High skill players in general in gaming are just good players that are very consistent. Competitive eSport players therefore prefer as deterministic gameplay as possible. This is one of the reasons why Counter-Strike has been a leading eSport title for so many years, because both teams start out with the same numbers, same amount of cash, and most likely players have an idea of where the enemy players are on the map and where they're going. This is already out the window for a BR and definitely so for Apex. An encounter between 2 full teams without third parties, however, could roughly resemble this style of gameplay. On the opposite side of the spectrum, there are low-skilled players, and I'm not talking about players that sometimes miss shots or make mistakes, I'm talking about bots. Players that can barely move around the map, that turn around slowly, that have no sense of their surroundings. This is most likely the majority of players. If you're watching YouTube or Twitch, your perception of who the average player is probably twisted. Remember, this type of player doesn't need a constant adrenaline rush, they're fine with a slower playstyle that consists mostly of looting until the final circle. But like with the high-skilled players, interference is best avoided, and that includes third parties and also fair fights. I'm only speaking for myself here, but I've never understood how third parties is a heated topic in a game like Apex, as it's literally part of its identity, and I'm not alone with that opinion. It's that chaotic gameplay that successfully yanked players from their favorite BRs back in 2019. Now, reading these discussions online, I feel like I'm the only player that picked up the valuable skill to either end a fight or flee a fight. Because I knew if I spent too much time tunnel visioned, I would eventually become a victim to a third party. There's also an inherent disparity between fast-paced games and BRs. BRs are viewed through the lens that the remaining squad is the only winner. It's an inherent property of BRs that placement trumps everything else. Now, this is a perfect fit for slower BRs where position and patience is more valuable than aim and movement, but it's the worst possible fit for Apex.
Oh my God, come on.
The notion that placement is king is echoed in Apex's ranked mode, where Respawn themselves grant a disproportionate amount of RP or rank points to placement over kills. Well, this only affects ranked, sure, but I would imagine that that mindset transfers across game modes. The definition of winning in Apex is placement, and I'm not sure that it should be. By being heavy-handed toward third parties and favoring placement over kills, Respawn has made the game slower, by reducing the number of encounters. Now you might ask, what is there to do besides fighting in a BR? Loot. And that's really the issue with the new Apex. In Apex, you loot because of necessity, not for added value. Take PUBG as an example. PUBG is really a session-based milsim survival game. To put it in simple terms, if you run across a field in PUBG carrying an ARM or any other high-tier loot, first off, you're going to be clenching your ass as hard as you can just running across that field. But when someone fires a Car 98 and that shot lands right next to your head and you hear the bullet crack, you're not just clenching your ass anymore, you're straight up shitting yourself. That tension is the result of game design and sound design working together perfectly. Without PUBG's low TDK, without its slower pace, without its reliance on loot, that Car 98 shot wouldn't matter as much. That time you spent looting before crossing that field actually meant something, but you probably just didn't realize it yourself. Again, what made 2019 Apex a force to be reckoned with was its union between player and game design. Everything the game did and how it did it, looting, ping system, squad respawns, and a lot more nudged the player into engaging other players. Season after season, the game design remains, but the pace of which it's played is very different. Why is placement king when the movement just asks you to light up squads? Why are maps filled to the brim with POIs when players are meant to share them and inevitably fight for them? For every new feature in new Apex, there's a contradicting feature remaining from old Apex. And I'm not here claiming that current Apex is a bad game, it's great at what it does. I'm not either saying that you cannot play the game like it's 2019, but what I am asking is why doesn't it play that way? Maps are definitely part of the answer. You might wonder what makes a good map that stays true to the Apex spirit. And I'm not here suggesting King's Canyon as the end-all be-all of maps because it has issues too, but a part of the answer is definitely to limit the number of POIs. However, the tactic to land safely outside some large named POI and accrued loot over time should still be a viable tactic, but a punished one. Beyond that, make players feel uncomfortable anywhere on the map, make players want to move, make players want to take that fight. In Respawn's crusade for fairness, they lost what made Apex interesting in the first place. Apex found its staying power in constant action over looting, in fun over balance, and in kills over placement. That's really what it took to yank players out of PUBG, Fortnite, or whatever BR they played at the time. Striving for fairness in a game like Apex will only make maps bigger, early game slower, and placement the defining difference between a good and a bad player. And at that point, why the hell am I not just playing PUBG?